Founded in 1759 near London, the Royal Botanic Gardens, also known as Kew Gardens, are one of the world's oldest botanic gardens. Their 120 hectares of parklands and Victorian glasshouses contain a multitude of rare plants painstakingly gathered over the centuries by explorers and scientists alike. Far from being just a simple tourist attraction, Kew is recognized as a world reference in terms of plant research and identification. For it still continues the long tradition of botanic exploration, pioneered by biologists such as Joseph Dalton Hooker and Charles Darwin. Martin Cheek is the head of Kew's department on wet tropical Africa. Part of his work involves localizing the last remaining virgin forests as yet untouched by man, where most of the world's biodiversity can still be found. Forests also known as primary forests.
A much broader leaf compared with Arabica.
It was during one of his trips to Cameroon, in a region inhabited by the Bakossi tribe, that Martin discovered a mountain forest featuring the most extraordinary biodiversity.
I first heard of the Bakossi region when we were doing surveys on Mount Cameroon. It was 1993. And one of my colleagues, who still works here at Kew with the Millennium Seed Bank, Stuart Cable, suggested to me that I make a visit to Mount Coupé. Mount Coupé was well known as the only home for the Mount Coupé bushreich, which is basically why there was a birdlife project there to protect the natural environment and to work with the communities to ensure the protection of the habitat for this bird species. It was 1995 that we were first able to take a group there doing a survey. At that time, only, I think it was about 120 species of plant were known from Mount Coupé. As the specimens mounted up and we worked through the identifications, we found to our surprise that the numbers of species were just going up and up and up, exceeding our estimates. And also the numbers of new species to science were rocketing upwards. And it was really quite hard to believe, because the Bakossi Mountains and Mount Coupé were really just in the case of Mount Coupé, just a footnote as far in the importance of diversity in Cameroon, and was certainly unknown at a global level. The great opportunity is if you could ever get up to this new road that's been cut through towards Ngouti. There are almost no collections from that area at all. You see, this is where we've
Martin appointed his colleague George Gosline to lead a new research expedition into the heart of the Bakossi forests, recognized in terms of biodiversity as one of Africa's leading tropical forests. This expedition is all the more timely in that its precious ecological resources are today coming under threat. Situated in southwest Cameroon, the Bakossi forests are one of the few remaining mountain forests in tropical Africa. For the first-time visitor, the most striking feature of these mountain forests is their summits, constantly swathed in mists which give them an impenetrable air of mystery. Located along an ancient volcanic range, its precarious landscape offers a wide variety of habitats, ideal for an unparalleled abundance of plant species.
is a lovely traditional house. That one they've kept up.
Upon his arrival, George Gosselin is joined by Jean-Michel Onana, director of the National Herbarium of Cameroon, and Martin Etugue, a botanist from the Bakossi region. Base camp will be set up at Ngomboku. The village has the advantage of being accessible by dirt road and of bordering the primary forest. Having welcomed them in the past, Chief Nguani knows the scientists quite well.
Well, you have always been so much help to us when we came, because of your authority and because you were a fine and upstanding man.
The village elders appreciate the work being carried out by the research team and their efforts to protect the forest.
Yes. The other time, make I talk English. Make my friend them too they hear. The other time we will be sit down. So we will sit down for give them cold water.
To welcome the botanists, the chief has organized a celebration ceremony attended by all the members of the village council. In the eyes of the Bakossi people, the mountains and forests are sacred places whose access they have jealously guarded over the years.
It will be very important.
In order for the botanist to be allowed into the forest, the chief must first obtain authorization from the Bakossi ancestors. Accustomed to this ritual, the botanists know that the success of their mission depends on its outcome. Following a series of long incantations, the elders throw kola nuts on the ground. For the Bakossi people, these nuts hold sacred properties. The way in which they fall on the ground will determine the decision of the ancestors. The spirits have spoken. Their verdict is favorable. Since their first expedition into the Bakossi forest, up to then virtually unexplored, the English and Cameroonian botanists have identified some 2,500 plant species, a significant number of which are of rare or endangered species. They also discovered a large number of plants which were previously unknown to science and which present a tremendous potential for scientific research.
A lot of medicinal plants can be found here. Some of the tree barks are used as remedies, and it is from these barks that drugs can be developed. For instance, we have the Prunus africana, which is a tree that grows not far from here, and which is used in the treatment of prostate problems.
Excellent as a fruit, one small coffee bean. So I first collected from this same tree 8 years ago in 1999 with one of our teams. And we've had a little trouble finding the tree again. But here it is. You can see, you may think, no, a coffee plant has, we've been marching through them, they have small trees. But there's some 90 species of coffees. And this one has wonderful big leaves. We collected the tree, took it back, and had no idea it was a new coffee. We thought it was one that was well known, but it turns out that this is one of three endemic, that is one of three species that is found only in the Bakossi Mountains in Mount Coupe. So I'm very happy to see this tree again. It is a bit of an old friend. Oh, well.
The discovery of a new species leads to the discovery of new genes, which in turn helps coffee growers to improve the quality of the coffee they grow. It's a very important genetic resource for Cameroon, because it gives the researchers and the coffee growers more raw material to work with.
In an effort to understand this profusion of endemic species, botanists began to study the origin of the Bakossi forest. In retracing its history throughout the ages, they made a surprising discovery.
You must understand that throughout the history of rainforests, there were times when they completely disappeared from certain places. But in this forest, the vegetation never disappeared. As a result, the plant species here are very, very old.
There's a well-established theory that during the last ice ages, and presumably previous ice ages, this part of the world became much drier. The result was that the rainforest largely disappeared from all the lowland areas of Africa. The mountains caught the rains and maintained the rainfall. So the Bakossi Mountains, Mount Cameroon, Manengouba, further in West Africa, all of these became islands of diversity for these tropical rainforest plants. One of our principal endemics is this Coupea martinetugii. This plant is in fact unifies some of the its relatives in South America and in other parts of Africa. And so it is quite possible that this plant in some sense dates back to the separation of the continents 120 million years ago.
A theory which would give a whole new meaning to these mists. Their role as natural humidifiers would have played an important part in ensuring the survival of these forests over millions and millions of years. Some of the Bakossi plants would thus date back to a time when dinosaurs still roamed these mountains.
You see this central thread? It's just this thread running here. It's remains of a free central placentation. Quite wonderful leaf. I think it has a whole order to itself.
However, if these forests have managed to resist some of the harshest climate changes in the planet's history, another threat currently clouds their future: man. Increasingly invasive, man's activities have already begun to erode this island of biodiversity.
This great tract of forests presents a tremendous possibility for conservation. When you move from this forest north up to the northwest province, you see the difference, because here 95% of the forest perhaps is intact. There 95% plus has been destroyed and cut down, and you are left with bare scrub hills of little visual interest and little botanic interest.
The Ministry of Forests conducted studies which show that 70% of Cameroon's forests are secondary forests. In other words, they have already been degraded in one way or another. Yet this one is still intact. Therefore, it's really urgent that it be protected.
The botanists hope that new findings will help to protect this biological reserve. Their samples may contain further unknown species, which could accelerate the classification of these Cameroonian forests as a national park. Each one of the botanist's expeditions results in the gathering of hundreds of samples of plants, flowers, and fruit, which in turn are dried and added to the already impressive database of the Kew Research Centre. This database, which contains over 7 million entries, is an invaluable tool in identifying new species and classifying forests by order of importance. Once solely reserved for the botanists at Kew, this fabulous collection is in the process of being put online and will soon be accessible to botanists the world over.
In Europe, most plant species can be identified by guidebooks to the wild plants of a particular country. That's not the case in the tropics. Identifying the plants in most tropical countries is very difficult because the plant species haven't been worked out, and even if they have, there are no good guides to their identification. Here at Kew, we have the biggest set of international reference specimens for very many tropical countries. And we also have a large number of plant specialists who are the leaders in identifying plant species in their particular families. One way in which areas are prioritised for conservation by international funds, such as those managed by the UNDP, perhaps GEF funds, is by the numbers of red data species that occur in such an area. Once we've worked out what all the plant species are, we can then evaluate them and see which are the most important ones for conservation. Typically, species important for conservation, red data species, are very narrowly distributed in the wild. They might be known from just one small mountain or one waterfall, sometimes from an area of, in an extreme case, of just a few square meters. And such species are obviously very vulnerable to extinction.
Yet one of the problems with identifying and cataloguing plant species remains the inaccessibility of a large part of these rainforest flora, which can only be found at the tops of trees, in the canopy. For the first time, George will have the opportunity to explore this part of the Bakossi forest. He is called upon the services of Danny Cléier-Marel, inventor and pilot of steerable balloons specifically designed for scientific use.
Well, this is the dream of every botanist, to be able to float above the canopy.
In tropical forests, the canopy represents a world of its own, where a multitude of plants thrive. Scientists estimate that 50 to 60% of biodiversity is found in these summits. For George, it's a unique opportunity to get up close to these tall trees, which he's usually limited to studying from the ground.
Should be Ceiba pentandra, which is the largest tree in Africa. Sometimes they call them cotton trees here. The cotton drifts down, can look like snow falling in Africa. It's amazing how many seeds a big tree like this puts out. Hundreds of thousands of seeds. In the end, just a few trees are generated from them. The orchids grow in the branches high in the trees, so we have not collected perhaps 50% of the orchids in this country or in the tropics because we cannot reach up into the canopy to the great branches high up. It would be wonderful we could perhaps reach in with a pole and knock the orchids down. This is one of the things I would like to try.
It's also a unique opportunity for the botanist from Kew Gardens to collect some samples and unlock some of this forest's best-kept secrets.
Quickly. Ah, merveilleux! Thank you. Excellent. Take this back and the specialist will identify.
How did these forests reach us in such a state of preservation? Their relative inaccessibility cannot be the only explanation for their astonishing survival throughout the ages.
Echo, can you hear me?
Martin Etuge draws our attention to one of the trees lining the trail.
Can you hear the sound?
Its naturally hollow trunk provides one of the keys to this enigma.
Hello. This is something here interesting. This is a tree called Silicomorpha samsia in the Caracaceae family. Let's say in the papaya, same family with papaya. And it's a big tree, a traditional tree in Bakosi, which was used in those days as a prison. If you were a stubborn man in the village or you commit a crime in the village, it's like history we met, They used to punish people, and they will always bring them here because it's a tree with a big hole from the base to the top. And the only thing you could do is to dump you inside to put you in prison. And that was it. Very, very big punishment in Bakosi land in those days.
Until the arrival of new belief systems, the Bakossi people had a sacred relationship with the trees of the forest. Although now on the decline, it was this sacred bond which enabled the forest to survive intact. To find out more about this unique relationship, Martin takes us to the village of Niasoso, which is located at the foot of Mount Coupe, one of the two main summits of the mountain range.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. How are you doing?
No, fine.
Yeah, I brought some people in. And, yeah, well, that one was the first one.
The village chief, Nzumenge of Niasoso, is one of the last guardians of the Bakossi traditions. Traditions which give pride of place not only to trees, but also to numerous species of animals.
Forest is so important for us because it has many medicinal plants. And we have our shrines. And secondly, it's not advisable for people to be cutting trees in that forest. First, because when you cut down the trees, for us in Bakosi, it is like killing our great ancestors and disturbing them. Most of our water comes from that mountain or in those forests. So when they start felling down the trees, it brings out, it spoils the soil. The soil is now loose. It can no longer hold water. So we start having shortage of water. That is the most important thing to us.
About 10 years ago, in order to halt the felling of Mount Coupe's forest, the Bakossi chiefs decided to recreate a traditional demarcation line, forbidding any logging or agricultural activity beyond its boundary.
Our forefathers made a boundary before even we were born. And so this time when we realized that people are going too far, so we decided to demarcate the boundary back so that our shrines and medicinal plants should be saved and our water should be saved. Because it is a law. Nobody goes there to destroy anything. Because we have many good things in Coupe.
For the Bakossi forests are not only a sanctuary for plants, they have also become a refuge for many endangered animal species.
When they started cutting down the forest, those things now migrated. But since this demarcation was made, they have started coming back. For example, like the drills, different kinds of monkeys, things like this special chameleon, we have special chameleons and special snakes in the mountain, which sometimes they are not found anywhere in Africa, or I can say in the world.
Jaap van der Waard is an ornithologist. For the past 3 years, he has been living in Bamenda, to the north of the Bakossi region. He's climbed Mount Coupe many times and knows its every twist and turn. For this mountain is renowned throughout the world for its extraordinary bird life.
Mount Coupe is a very special place in Cameroon, especially for bird watchers. It's in the top 3 of places in Africa to go to if you want to do bird watching. And that is because of the astonishing, I would say, number of birds that you can see here. There's about 330 species of birds that have been seen on this mountain, and including many, many endemic species that you can only see in Cameroon. Cameroon in itself is rich in birds. There's about 960 species of birds in Cameroon. If you compare that, for instance, to Europe, Europe has about 900. So this country alone has more birds than the whole of Europe together.
However, from a birdwatcher's standpoint, it is one bird in particular which gives the mountain its real significance.
This place is the most famous of all because there's a bird called the Mount Coupe bushshrike, and birdwatchers from all over the world come here to see that one single bird. This mountain has been fairly well researched, and they estimate that in the late 90s there were 7 breeding pairs of bushshrike on the mountain. They found the bird as well in the Bakossi mountains. The estimate that there's no more than 50 breeding pairs of the Mount Coupe bushshrike at all, in an area not bigger than 50 square kilometers. We can see, if we climb up this mountain, that the forest boundary is still respected. There's no farming beyond the forest boundary. That is because when the boundary was created, it was created inside the forest to allow sort of a buffer zone. You can see that this buffer zone is being consumed. So in several years' time, the people will reach the forest boundary. And then the question is, do we stop and do we respect the forest as it is? Or are people just going to continue?
In ecosystems like that of the Bakossi forest, each organism plays an essential role in maintaining the ecological balance that is the very basis of biodiversity. Insects, reptiles, mammals, plants, all are linked by an intricate network of interdependent relationships. Thus, certain ants defend the plants they rely upon for nesting from other herbivorous insects. In the same manner, some trees, such as the strangler fig tree, depend entirely on birds for reproduction.
If some of the birds might disappear, then we would see that some of those plants would disappear as well. The point, of course, is that if you look at a place like Mount Coupe with 350 species of birds and, I don't know, more than 1,000 species of plants, we just don't know all those relationships. Like for Mount Coupe bushshrike, we still don't really know what he eats. What is the food of the Mount Coupe bushshrike? You need to study that more. You need to follow the bird and see what he's doing to know what he's dependent on. That is the type of work that needs to be done to fully understand.
But agriculture is not the only threat facing this haven of biodiversity. Another threat is slowly undermining its ecological heritage, the bushmeat trade. The intensive hunting associated with this trade endangers another equally fascinating animal species, the drill monkey. Bethan Morgan works on the conservation of endangered species for the San Diego Zoo. For the past 6 years, she's been studying some of the most threatened species of primates in Cameroon. As a specialist on drills, she knows that the fight to protect the Bakossi forests is also the fight to protect this extremely rare monkey. Today, she's visiting her friend, Simon de Vries, at the Limbe Wildlife Center. Originally intended to be simply a zoo, the centre has gradually transformed itself into a refuge for orphans of the bushmeat trade.
Drills are monkeys, not great apes. They're monkeys, but of course they're all within the primates. We don't really have a great idea of how many are left, but we do know that they only live in a very small part of eastern Nigeria, in a small part again of western Cameroon, and also on the island of Bioko. The drill's face is actually black and white, except for a bright red lip that comes into being when the drill is old enough. And that's only, of course, in the male drills. The female drills are actually quite drab. Little colour, if any, on them at all. I spent quite a bit of time in the Bakossi Mountains and also in Mount Coupe, and had a little house in Niasasso village, which was my base. So there are still significant numbers of drills on the mountain. Only 3 years ago, on Mount Coupe, a group of 200 drills was seen just on the flanks, just up from Niasasso, by an ex-hunter who I know pretty well. So they are still there, but they are taken still by hunters.
Initially used only for the hunter's own consumption, bushmeat has become a prized sales commodity. This development has put many species of Cameroonian fauna at risk.
If you have the money, then what you would want to do is eat a species that's more endangered, more expensive, more difficult to get. Within the villages themselves, very little of the really endangered animals are eaten. That is taken to the cities to be eaten. And I think until that culture changes, we're fighting a more and more difficult battle to try and get this under control. I think it's absolutely imperative that we start to protect the habitats in which these drills are living as soon as possible. The best thing to do is to look at the whole assemblage of mammal species in the area. And those areas where there are still good populations of drills and other large mammals, we should start to protect immediately. Otherwise, we're just going to lose more and more forests, and then it's just going to be so difficult to put animals back again. Right? We've never proven that we can do this. It's certainly not with drills.
The bag, when you harvest the bag, there was a company in Cameroon, and they were buying these bags.
In an attempt to counteract this overexploitation of the forest resources, Martin Etuge and his friend Jacob Nkwele have set up their own conservation project.
Another one to grow, so that maybe you come next time and then you continue, harvesting.
On a regular basis, Martin and Jacob visit Bakossi schools to teach young children about the ecological importance of some of their region's most precious animal and plant species. This groundwork is being carried out in association with the literacy program also being implemented in the region.
We have the material translated in the Bakossi language from English. For example, trees, lakes, climate, all those things can be now spoken in the dialect of the people. And when they speak it at that level, they understand better. It becomes part and parcel of them. Bakossi, Hornbock, Alexander Ngomen-Toko, who is presently based in Switzerland, he said he had...
In addition to their work with children, they continue to canvass the government to have the zone classified as a national park. But despite the government's apparent willingness to protect the region, to date, their efforts have been in vain.
After the sensitization process for the gazettement of the park went through, the report was written and sent to the ministry. We could not trace whether the file was in the Ministry of Forest and Wildlife or was Environment and Nature Protection. So we went to Yaoundé and tried to follow up. We had a lot of difficulties, but the Director of Wildlife and Protected Areas told us that it would be important for us to relaunch the whole process all through.
But in Europe, it's like they have a different Prunus.
Yeah.
It's not Prunus africana, but a different Prunus. Yeah. But here, Prunus africana in Cameroon, only found on mountain areas, like the Bamenda Highlands, Mount Coupe.
In the meantime, Martin has created his own botanic garden, where he conserves the Bakossi Mountains' most endangered and rare plants. It is this legacy that he hopes one day to be able to leave his children. Situated on the northern border of the Bakossi region, Mount Manengouba is the main volcano in this mountain range. Its crater is the site of two lakes where the original ancestors of the Bakossi people are believed to have been born. The male lake and the female lake. Nowadays, its summit is populated by a group of pearl. Attracted by its microclimate, this nomadic people from the north settled here to raise their cattle. Over 10 million years ago, it was here, in this cocoon of mist, that thousands of plant and animal species waited for the last ice age to come to an end. Today, the slopes of this mountain are a living example of the danger that awaits the other Bakossi mountains if nothing is done to protect them.
The change in vegetation around this mountain is due to man's intervention. When people settled here, they had to cultivate the land to survive. And then there's the cattle breeding you can see all around us. These animals not only graze on grass, they also graze on trees. So all this means is that the forest was encroached upon, and today all that remains is this grassland.
Here is a nice terrestrial orchid for us. Martin. Oh, nice. Okay.
Umbrella for you.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, nice.
Here's a lovely little terrestrial orchid, actually quite large, and we try and get down to get the corm out. Yes. It's very important to have all these characters for identification.
Sure.
Okay.
Oh,
I must suppose, yeah. So
it's like onion.
It is, and if we ask the local people, even it's possible they could be eating it. Very carefully. Okay.
It's fragile.
Yeah. Right.
Martin and Jacob insist on bringing us to another part of the Bakossi forest, one that no longer holds the slightest botanical interest, and with good reason. In 2004, a timber company began felling trees on a massive scale without any authorization. In the space of a few months, more than 40 hectares of rainforest were completely destroyed.
When they clear the environment, they clear the forest in the extraction of logs, immediately they start putting perennial crops like you see a young cocoa tree, which is just a year and a half or two. After the gandry left, the logging left, then now farms continue to expand into the forest.
Today, all that remains of the sturdy infrastructures promised to the local village by the timber company is a ruined bridge that was used by the logging trucks. It's the appearance of this new threat, by far the most devastating, that the Bakossi people fear most, if no measures are taken by the government to protect their forest.
You see, when the bulldozer came here, it opened up this forest, destroyed the trees that were here, and then expose the place to serious erosion. So you can see how erosion has taken place here. In fact, the soil has been washed off. And if this place is not protected somehow, it will continue and the ravine continues to expand. You see, the wash of the trees here have been lost, and so on.
Things like azobe and the rest gone.
Yes, you know, azobe was the most important plant we were looking for because it's an exotic species of plant, timber, which is very expensive.
Philip Verbelen works for Greenpeace and is familiar with the case of illegal logging in the Bakossi region. Today, he is one of the few people that knows what became of the timber taken from one of the oldest forests on the planet.
The boardwalk we are standing on the Belgian coast, it's a big construction project for which a lot of tropical timber from the rainforest of Cameroon has been used. The wood for this very project comes from the Bakossi region, where Greenpeace uncovered massive illegal logging operations. It's a timber species, azobe. It's used here because it doesn't rot, it's weather resistant. People believe that at the current rate of exploitation, azobe could be endangered and that regeneration is not guaranteed. Europe, as an importer of tropical timber from Africa, has a very big responsibility in driving the trade in illegal timber.
Since 2003, conscious of the role it has to play, the European Union has been trying to fill the gap in its legislation on timber importation through the implementation of an action plan called FLECT.
Within the framework of FLECT, the European Commission has implemented an action plan. This action plan involves negotiating agreements with tropical timber exporting countries in order to regulate the timber trade and certify the legality of the timber being exported. The member states of the European Union have undertaken measures to ensure that only certified timber be used, for example, in public sector contracts. However, to comply with WTO free trade regulations, we cannot restrict the use of timber that is not certified as legal within the context of the FLECT plan. We can, however, encourage public opinion and governments to use certified timber. Given that the agreement is voluntary, it doesn't preclude other non-partner countries from continuing to export illegal timber. However, we are hoping they will follow suit. And we're also counting on the fact that other big importing countries, such as the United States and also more recently China, are paying close attention to the European approach and are trying to implement a similar system. Obviously, if all the importing countries were to use the same framework, it would be much easier.
Well, according to Greenpeace, it should not be so complicated at all to set up legislation to prevent illegal timber from entering Europe. If you look at, for example, the food industry, as soon as there is a scandal, for example, with meat, we can trace the source of the meat to its origin. We see no reason why this should not be possible with timber. Often the regions where illegal logging are happening are regions where the biodiversity is very high. There are many endangered species, so we are rapidly losing these species that are in danger of extinction. And on a more global scale, it is now very well recognized that the preservation of these tropical rainforests plays a role in the stabilization of the global climate.
If nothing is done to protect them, the Bakossi forests, like so many primary forests before them, risk disappearing altogether. With them, hundreds of plant and animal species would also disappear. Their trees would no longer contribute to the absorption of carbon dioxide present in the atmosphere. But more than just representing a loss for humankind, their disappearance would mark the end of this exceptional bond that the Bakossi people forged with their environment and maintained throughout the ages.